No.
All right. Thank y'all for coming to the second session for the Prodigal God. Here we go with Timothy Keller, chapter 2. And this week we will be focusing on the two lost sons. And he starts where most of us have been taught and preached to start, and that is with the lost younger brother. But he does it to set up two acts in the story, Act 1 and Act 2. And Act 2 is the one that we have, for the most part, we've kind of ignored it. The elder brother, I've never, I haven't read this book. I've read other things by Keller, but I haven't read this book. So I'm going into this with fresh eyes like you guys. The focus of my life has always been on the salvation of the younger brother, that he, and I preached it myself, that he repents and comes back to the Father to his surprise. He encounters he has it all planned out to where he can get back in the house, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. He has his speech all planned, but the Father doesn't want to hear any of it and showers him. But let's talk about that, and then we'll get into the older brother as well. John and I were talking just a bit about this last night, and he's gotten a little further ahead in the book, and as he said to me last night, and I agree, at least for me, not for him, but for me, that I have been both of these brothers at any given time.
Yes.
So let's start. Carol, you're our highlighting queen, and so what did you have highlighted that you'd like to begin with today?
Well, on page 21,
yeah,
the first full paragraph. Here, the younger son asks for his inheritance now, which was a sign of deep disrespect. To ask this while the father still lived was the same as to wish him dead. I didn't realize that, that.
Yeah, just imagine, just take it out of this context. Right. You have a rich relative, and which I have one, and you go to them and you say, "Look, I know I'm in your will, but you're going to need to give me that inheritance now. You have just said, let's pretend you're dead, and just give me mine so I can get out of here."
It's even more asking when you think about it.
Yeah.
If in that society, what they have, herds of sheep
flocks
and goats,
and
flocks and land.
Yeah.
So to give an inheritance, what would they have to do?
Give up.
Sell some of that. So basically, everything is reduced.
That's
exactly.
What Keller said. That's what Keller said here, that he would have had, the father would have had to, with much shame, reduce what he had.
You were giving an imaginary example, Carol. We had that happen in our family.
Ditto. That's horrible.
Wow.
That's horrible.
His brother was dying of cancer.
And my niece says, "How about giving me mine now?"
Oh my.
Wow.
Goodness.
Deeply troubled young lady at the time.
Yeah, and he says here at the finish of that paragraph, the same one that Carol was pointing out, he wants out. Now give me what is mine. He says,
And then the next sentence, the father's response is even more startling than the request.
Yeah. He does not respond at all the way that would have been a typical response then and most likely today, right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
This was just to be highly disrespected by his son. And yet, he gives him what he wants. He simply, the Bible says, and Jesus says, divided his property between them. And then there's an interesting word here for property, and the word is bios. We get biology, the study of life. So we have this, a more concrete word to denote capital could have been used, but was not. So why not? And they go into this discussion about the land. And this, I was in the musical Oklahoma, played curly, rode into our gym on a horse, scared out of my mind.
You played curly?
There's a bright golden haze on the meadow.
I want the horse.
He could better do it today.
That'd make a great camp horse if it put up with him.
Oh, yeah.
I was wearing a cowboy hat, and I wasn't just riding the horse. People were leading it. But yeah, I came into a dark gymnasium singing that at the very beginning. But the and the big thing was they wanted me and I forget the love interest name in Shirley Jones. There you go. But whatever her character's name was, we had to kiss, and we weren't too fond of one another. But
Now you know what true acting is.
for the sake of art, we made it happen. All right.
What was the name of the antagonist, the rapist?
I forget. I really do. I only remember like 8-0 Annie. She's just a girl who can't say no, and all of that. But there you go. But yeah, look, the lyric here, we know we belong to the land, and the land we belong to is grand. The same kind of idea for the Israelites or other people back then. They didn't say that the land belonged to them. Because if you go back and you think about the promise that God made to Abram, he promised him land. That was one of the big things, was land that he promised, right?
Yeah, and then he
Go ahead.
says in our
Yes.
urbanized culture, we don't understand the relationship of the people in former generations to their land.
We don't.
Yeah.
You've remarked that people that we drive over to Peachtree Corners to eat, and we see these humongous houses sitting on half acre, and people don't want land anymore. Not really. I mean, not around here. They want a big house and no grass to cut, which that sounds good.
I'm glad they can
Now-
afford maid service.
Right.
Where-
Yeah, exactly.
Where I grew up
Yeah, you grew
younger,
up on the land.
grew
man.
up having to help farm the land, so I kind of understand a little bit of how important that is, but still it's hard for a lot of people to,
It is.
and we didn't, it was not as important. I mean, it was more important in this time of Jesus, of Jesus, because the land was where
Yes,
that was their possession.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was.
that's their
that's
possession.
Yeah,
the
it was
168
China.
acres up there in Virginia.
What you got, Ed?
When Carol and I were coming up in our younger years,
Mm-hmm.
we were hitting right at the end of the time of the farm,
Yes, sir.
where the only way people had of surviving was by what they could produce on the farm. That's where their money came from, that's where their food came from. So, yeah, the land was more important than anything else you had, because if you didn't have land, you're gonna starve to death,
Amen. Yeah. that's right.
especially in this area.
Yeah, right.
Well, all of the urbanites are about to find out that's the truth too, the way all the land is being subdeveloped.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
It's true. It's nice to drive out out on Snow's Mill Road. It's nice to drive out to Watkinsville and see still large tracts of land. Some of it owned by the university, but a lot of it's still owned by families that have cattle and fields, and they move their cattle and all of that. And I wouldn't know anything about any of that if I hadn't watched Yellowstone, Gerald. But anyway, so yeah. I
When we
mean, yeah.
ride all that greenery
Yeah.
where you don't have concrete jungles, you have
Yeah.
fields and fields, it's just
Oh, yeah.
beautiful.
So on page 23, so the last paragraph on the page, this younger brother then is asking his father to tear his life apart. And the father does so for the love of his son. This would have, the people that were listening to Jesus, this would have been unheard of. The father patiently endures a tremendous loss of honor, as well as the pain of rejected love. Ordinarily, when our love is rejected, we get angry, we retaliate, or do what we can to diminish our affection for the rejecting person so we won't hurt so much. But this father maintains his affection for his son. Bears the agony. All right, so let's move to scene 2. Scene 2, actually. Dude goes off to what Jesus calls a far country. All right. And as you would expect, like most people who win the lottery, not all, but most of them squander everything they've got through, I can't believe some of the celebrities and musicians, and most specifically ball players, athletes that are in the major sports that are making the Goo-Gah dollars, oh my gosh, who are broke in a matter of years. And that just, but I have to always remember, they're not living your lifestyle, James. They're living the lifestyle that, as Robert Lynch used to say, of the rich and famous, so it's a little different, I suppose. But the sun goes off, he squanders it all, and then when he is literally down in the mud with the pigs, which was unclean to the hilt for a Jew, he comes to his senses, and then he devises a plan. And it is a plan, all right? He's going to go back to dad, admit he was wrong. He's forfeited the right to be his son. But this is interesting. Make me like one of your hired men. And the specificity with which he asks, he's not asking to be let back into the house. What he wants is one of these contracted workers that you got coming in and working for you. The servants lived on the property, again, like Yellowstone. The guys live out in the bunkhouse. The servants would have lived out there. They would have lived in some kind of quarters. But the hired men come in from the outside. And so what he actually wanted his dad to do, according to Keller, is to farm him out to learn a trade so he could begin to pay him back. Now, had I ever considered that? No. No, I had not. Commentaries that I had read on the Prodigal Son, and I've read some Titans on it. They've never mentioned it before, and so for me, this was interesting. How about you?
Oh, yeah, I thought so.
We all thought he wanted just to get his place in the bunkhouse back and just kind of
Or become a servant.
right?
Yeah.
But if we notice, what he says is, "Make me like one of your hired men." And so I think Keller does some interesting work here.
And also meant that the son was gonna get a salary from his dad too.
Right. The younger son had disgraced his family. Same page there, page 24. This is it, his strategy. So he disgraced his family, therefore the whole community. He was dead to them, as the father describes it. Now, the rabbis taught that if you had violated the community standards, an apology was not sufficient. You had to make restitution, just like Sally yells for after she misses tricks or treats, and It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, where Linus fools her into going out to wait for the Great Pumpkin, and the last word she says is, "You owe me restitution." She missed tricks or treats, but that's not going to be enough. You got to restitute what you got to pay it back. So the son intends to say, this is a great father. I know I don't have a right to come back into the family, but if you apprentice me to one of your hired men so I can learn a trade and earn a wage, then I could at least begin to pay off my debt. That was his plan. He's sitting in the pigsty. The younger son rehearses his speech. He probably rehearsed it all the way home. And then here's the dramatic third and final scene of Act 1. The dad was like, I believe, Motel 6. We'll leave the light on for you. Or was that Red Roof Inn?
No,
Motel
Motel
6.
Motel 6,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah.
We'll leave the light on for you. Father sees him coming and runs to him. And I've told y'all this before. Distinguished Middle Eastern gentlemen don't run to anybody. They certainly are not going to pick up their robes like some kid and bare their legs. They're not going to do it. But he does. He runs to him, right? No, man, we know the story. We're so familiar with the story that we miss some of this. I think when we read it, he shows his emotions openly and falls upon him and kisses him before a word is even out of his mouth, right? But then, like a kid who's trying to get back into the good graces of his parents, he rolls out his plan, his business plan for restitution, He didn't think, but here's the thing, he didn't think he could be reconciled. He just wanted to pay his dad back.
Mhm.
And that's commendable, to say the very least.
Oh, yeah.
But before he starts opening his mouth and the word out of his father's mouth is quick, here come the servants. Bring the best robe and put it on him. You know whose robe was the best?
Yes.
Dad's robe.
Yes, oh, absolutely.
Yes, sir. He's back. I'm not gonna wait until you've paid off your debt. I'm not gonna wait until you duly groveled. You are not going to earn your way back into the family. I'm not going to simply take you back. I will cover your nakedness, poverty, and rags with the robes of my office and honor, my Lord. What is wrong with this father?
He loves his son.
Let's eat, right? Says, let's have a celebration. Bring the
Fatted
Fatted
calf.
calf.
fattened calf. People who grew up on farms say fatted calf. The fattened calf. There you go. But I like it. Either way, it's right. In that society, most meals did not include meat. Did you know that?
I mean,
I didn't, that was
Meat
interesting.
meat was for the rich.
I mean, how many animals do you have? And a calf that's been prepared for
Festival.
sacrifice or festival
Yeah,
is really rare.
it is. It is.
And it wouldn't grow up to have more cattle.
Yeah, it was an expensive delicacy.
Yes.
Yeah. So meat was often reserved for special occasions and parties. But no meat was more expensive than the fattened calf, he says on page 27. To throw such a feast would have been something that happened only on the rarest of occasions, and likely everybody would be invited. Everybody would be invited. Word spread quickly, and soon there was a full-fledged feast going on with music and dancing, all to celebrate the restoration of the younger son to life, family, and community. Now, I believe I've told you this story. Just a little aside here. In his inimitable style, Fred Craddock took this parable and put it in terms of a young woman who was riding on every tailgate in town and was in trouble. And she got in trouble. She had to go spend some time in the juvenile detention area. Oh, by the way, she was pregnant when she went in. She had the baby while she was there. And Craddock lived on the same street as these people. And he told the story. He says that the father of this girl came over to him and says, hey, you know that daughter of mine? She's coming home and she's bringing the baby. And we'd like for you and Nettie to come and see him. And so he said all the neighbors, it was grass cutting day. So the day that she was planning to come home, everybody went out there and started to mow the grass, everybody. And he said, well, I got down to about one blade at a time trying to slow down so I would be outside so I could see her coming. And there she was. She got out of that car and there was that baby. And he said, I was invited, but would I go? Would I go? He said, it's a lot easier to preach the prodigal son than it is to go to that party. And this is what would have been happening.
Mhm.
This is what would have been happening in the village. They would have said, are you kidding me? He's what? That man has lost his mind. He welcomed him what? And now they killed the who? And all of that is going on but they would have all been invited. So the question is, would you go? You know, that's an invitation. Would you go to that party? And so here we have it. There's a party going on, but well, there's somebody else in this story.
Yes.
Act 2.
This is something that I had never really appreciated the depth of this parable.
The only
Yeah, I
thing
agree
that
with
I
you.
had ever said about this particular point of this parable is that the father reacts the same way to both boys. He goes out to them. He welcomes them. He repeats his love for them. I mean, everything that the father in this story does for the younger, he does for the older as well. Okay.
But
Yeah, go ahead.
the fact that all of these people came, they did not come to see the son, they came out of respect for the father.
Yeah, they did. Mhm. But I bet some of them are like, is that him? Some are like,
Oh,
look-
yeah.
Look at him.
But still,
Somebody needs to get that boy a sandwich, you know. He was, in bad shape. But yeah, you're right. It was in honor of the father. Absolutely. Absolutely. Could not agree. Could not agree more. But here we go. Act 1 already challenges. I'm on page 27. It already challenges the mindset of elder brothers. By the way, who are the elder brothers? I mean, remember this, the key to this whole parable is behind us.
Yes, because
Who's he talking to?
When Jesus is giving this, he's talking to the Pharisees.
He's got the scribes and the Pharisees there among, and who are the people again that are attracted to Jesus all the time? The tax collectors and sinners. That phrase Luke uses over and over again. And remember last week that, well, they don't come to our services. Now, we said, well, they wouldn't be welcome, probably. But the fact remains is that Jesus had built up a following of the least of these, the tax collectors and sinners, the younger son. And he was talking, and they were complaining about this. And so we have to keep that in mind, that this story was told with a point to certain people. Now, he was teaching his tax collectors and sinners as well, but the elders and chief priests, as we've seen done beautifully, actually we saw it last week, in The Chosen, where Jesus is there in their midst. He's doing some healing, he's doing some teaching, and in this imaginative retelling of the coming of the disciples of John the Baptist to him, asking him, hey, look, John wants to know, are you the one, or should we look for another? Okay, Jesus then begins to quote those wonderful passages from the Hebrew Bible, and there the whole time, standing off to the side,
Just two of the Pharisees.
well, there's three actually.
Oh, okay.
There's two over here who are pro-Jesus, and there's one over here who can't stand his guts.
Was Jairus a Pharisee or just sort of like an administrator?
He would have been either a Pharisee or a Sadducee, having that access that he had there. He would have been in one of those classes. Yeah, so, yeah.
The, one thing about the older brother, and it brought out in the book here too, that Jesus said this parable, and I think he was mainly talking to the Pharisees and the way they handle the older brother. I'm just wondering if the Pharisees realized that they were the older brother.
Right.
They do,
This parable.
because right after this story, they're angry because they realize that he told this story about them. Yeah. So I think they did. I think they got the point. Now I don't think they got it. They didn't get it.
Maybe some of them might have.
They understood that he was insulting them, and the thing is that he wasn't insulting them. They took it as an insult. But he is really, and I've said this before, I really believe that Jesus, with all of his heart, when he looked at the Pharisees, he loved them. He wanted them, like this father in this story, come out, come out, come out, please come out. We're going to get more of that as the book goes on. Yeah, go
He
ahead.
wants them to see their need,
Yeah,
not the sin.
right, exactly.
Their own need.
All right, let's move on with this lost elder brother. So Act 1, he concludes here. Act 1, I'm on page 28, the second paragraph. Act 1 then demonstrates the lavish prodigality of God's grace. Jesus shows the Father pouncing on his Son in love, not only because he has a chance to clean up his life and evidence a change of heart, but even before he can recite his repentance speech. Nothing, not even abject contrition, merits the favor of God. The Father's love and acceptance are absolutely free. Now we are getting here into the littlest bits of Calvinism. Grace. Our salvation is not dependent upon our confession. A Calvinist is going to say our salvation is contingent totally upon the sovereign choice and grace of God electing us for salvation. The prodigal, the father in this story, acts exactly that way in this telling, the way that Keller approaches it. And if you read it, well, yeah, I mean, the son had his excuses made. He was ready to grovel. And the father said, I don't want to hear any of that. You're my son. You're back. It's pure grace. Pure grace. And we are saved. We keep going over this. We are saved by grace through faith, lest any man should boast, I think Paul said. So, and then we'll continue talking about this, but he peaks. I think I posted something on Facebook a while back, said if I was going to be a Calvinist, I'd want to be like Tim Keller, because Tim is in the middle. Tim really does navigate the line really well of our coming to Christ, that whole free will and sovereign election and all that stuff. And he really does. He really does kind of, and he makes these people over here in his tribe really, made him really mad, because he would like to play over here a little bit. So I just want you to know that theologically we're encountering the grace, the Reformed grace. Martin Luther, this is what made him just spring alive and go, okay, so it's not, but remember, he's reacting against what? Martin Luther. We have to talk about Marty Luther if we talk about grace. What was he reacting against?
The church.
He was
Catholic.
reacting against the Catholic Church and the sale of indulgences and the promises that the Catholics were making to people if they would could pay for certain, and it was to build, at that time, it was to build St. Peter's Basilica in Rome at that time. And Luther just came to the point where he just said, this can't be right. And we really need to, this is not the gospel. And so that's where we get the whole grace thing. Grace, right? And that's what he's saying, it's grace. The Father's love and acceptance are absolutely free. But the next paragraph, he does say, and most commentators do indeed do this, and that they say that it contradicts traditional Christian doctrine. Look, they say, there is no mention of atonement for sin. There's no need for a Savior on a cross that pays for sin. God is a God of universal love who unconditionally accepts everyone, no matter what. Right? Well, if that were the message, Jesus would have ended the parable right there, the narrative there. But he doesn't, does he? Because it isn't. Act 1 shows us the freeness of God's grace. Act 2 will show us the costliness.
But the younger brother did decide to go to the father.
He made the
So
choice.
that is the repentance, even though the father didn't need to hear it or want to hear it.
Yep.
He made the first step towards the father.
Yep. We'll hear more about that as we go. Now, how about this older son? I'm going to ask the question. On page 30 to you. So why is the older son so furious?
Because he always served the father and obeyed everything the father wanted.
Amen. So what's this about? I mean,
It was like the Pharisees. They followed the law.
and don't let that. And I'm going to work on this until the day I die. Don't. I have tried over the past, ever since I got a hold of Amy Jill, Levin and Scott McKnight, and he did some book reviews on his blog spot where he talked about the word Pharisee. We have often tended to look at the word Pharisee as negative, as almost evil, if we're not careful. That's not right. The Pharisees, if you had a Bible question, you went to them. They knew the word. They loved God's word. I'm going to go another step further. They loved God.
Yes. Yeah.
They loved Yahweh.
That's one reason why they were so adamant about not accepting false prophets, because they believed in God.
They did.
They didn't want anybody to pretend to be
Right.
something they weren't.
Rich Mullins, before he died, I put this little short video out there as well, where he's talking about, the preachers of the prosperity gospel, and all of that, are telling people that that's what God wants, is to make people healthy and wealthy. And he says the people in the big churches that are preaching, this prosperity stuff. And listen, this is what he said, and I treasure it. They're not bad, they're just wrong. They're just wrong. And I thought, you know, the Pharisees, they're not bad. They're just wrong. You know, because Jesus is standing there in front of them, God is standing there in front of them. I missed him. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if the Pharisees loved God, I think they loved the law.
I think they did love God. I think they were, and the way they showed their love of God was by their adherence to the law. I think, at least for me, now I can't speak about all the Pharisees,
that's
but
awfully good.
certainly they loved power. The Sadducees loved it more than they did.
I'm wondering though, because they never called God by his name, they always called him by something else because I think they were scared of him.
Adonai, right.
And in that regard, I'm wondering if their view of love toward God would have been sacrilegious or something more. That's the reason they loved the law so much. He gave them the law, so they focused on the law. That was what he wanted. That's what he did. But as far as saying, hey, I love God, I don't know that, in my opinion, I don't see them saying that they love God so much, because they would look at that as sort of being sacrilegious. Would you say?
Jan, what do you got, man?
Just
Good. Thank you,
thinking,
man.
isn't it somewhere, somehow,
Somehow.
if you love me, you will obey my commandments?
I think Jesus said that. Yeah. If you,
Uh-huh.
yeah. I think so. Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's one of my things for the Pharisees. That's what they're following.
Yeah, and I want to jump on that a bit. Thank you for saying that, and I appreciate all the good feedback. This is great. I watched a video last night of D.A. Carson. He's of the same tribe as, and we're finishing up 2 years with D.A. at the end of this year, and whew. But anyway, D.A. Carson did a little short video, 3 minutes long. How were the Old Testament saints saved? And it was interesting. Because I've often thought about that. Often we say, we got it all figured. We're Christians. We got it all figured out. On the other side of Calvary, we got it all figured out, y'all. That Jesus went down and preached to the saints in prison, and that meant that it was every single stinking person who ever lived in Israel, and they were all down there together. And that's actually not the way that the doctrine is taught. But D.A. Carson said that the way that he said it's the same way that we, with the exception that we have a more full revelation in the fullest in Jesus Christ, that the way they did it was, and this was his statement, they kept the law, and that God's observance of them living obediently and faithfully to the covenant that they were under, that when they died, he said, that would be what would happen. But again, that's just one scholar out of 300,000 who, and I thought that was something to think about. Now, it is true in this story right here, and it may have been true of many of the Pharisees that Jesus is talking to here, that they viewed themselves the same way the older brother viewed himself, as a what? A servant, not a son. He did not view himself as a son. So it may be that as they loved God, they saw themselves more as servants and not children. And again, it's hard to make a blanket statement for all Pharisees, because, oh, by the way, we still have Pharisees. There are Pharisees in this church. I'm not going to tell you their names.
I think that.
I might be one of them. No, go ahead.
I think that
That's
there's
enough.
a distinction that I need to see is
Sure.
there is a difference between a servant and a child of God. Even though we serve God, that isn't going to get us into heaven. We get there because we're children of God.
Right.
But there is a difference.
Sure.
But you still need to be a servant of.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The problem comes is that when you see yourself as just. Now, Paul's favorite, the Apostle Paul, who was by the way, if you want to know, he was a Pharisee of Pharisees, and he'll tell you all about it. He was a Pharisee of Pharisees. He graduated top summa cum laude. He was 8, 5, 7 to 3,000 places above the next student in his class. But his favorite designation for himself is not child of God. Doulos. Doulos. Servant. Slave. That's the word. That's the word. That's his favorite word. Not apostle, not, he calls himself an apostle every once in a while, but, he didn't care about titles. He was a servant of Jesus Christ. Jane?
I was just thinking how awful it would be to be the servant child, but not being accepted or feeling like you're accepted as the child.
And that's the older brother.
Yes.
I've done all this. We kept this. I can recite the whole Hebrew Bible forward and backwards.
Taking
Yeah,
it
go
out
ahead,
of
Gail.
context,
Go ahead.
the oldest in the family always feels that way.
That's interesting.
Yes, they're the responsible one.
That was true in my grandmother's family. My late Uncle James was definitely the responsible one. Yeah, he was. Yeah, my dad was the problem. You see where I get it from. But my dad definitely was the middle problem child, and Wayne got everything he wanted, just about. I mean, it just it was typical. But you're right, the oldest child. Yeah, it's that thing. So let's talk about him before we go. I'm noticing if we look at page 31, you haven't given me anything. No, look back over at 30. He says, look, you've never given me even a goat for a party. How dare you give him the calf? That's an interesting translation, but it's true. The fattened calf is only a symbol, however, because what the father has done costs far more than the calf. By bringing the younger brother back into the family, he has made him an heir again, with a claim to 1/3 of their now very diminished family wealth. This is unconscionable to the old brother. He's adding things up. Are you hearing a parable here?
Yeah, the ones who work for 5 hours and one who works for 2 hours. Yeah,
But yet they got the same.
they all got the same.
He's adding things up. I've worked myself to death and earned what I've got, but my brother has done nothing to earn anything. Indeed, he's merited only expulsion, and yet you lavish him with wealth. And here's the question we ask: where's the justice in that? And that's why the older brother refers to his record. I have never disobeyed you, so I have rights.
Right.
He is saying, I deserve to be consulted about this. You have no right to make these decisions unilaterally. And so the eldest brother fury leads him to insult the father even further. He refuses to address him in the elaborately respectful manner that inferiors owed superiors in that culture. He doesn't say, esteemed father. He just says, look.
Look, you.
Look, you. Go ahead,
But
Jan.
when the father divided the inheritance and gave the elder brother his 2/3,
Yes.
that meant that he's saying his father is now giving away something that he legally owns.
That could be. Yeah, it could be.
I have rights.
I have rights.
I know a good lawyer. Oh, I'm sorry.
They're not okay.
Of course, he's a
One
Pharisee.
thing you talk about, father, him being an heir and his father giving him wealth again. Where's the wealth? All he did was give him a coat and a fatted calf.
He had to sell it. Well, it's not that. He's now an heir again.
Yeah,
When his father dies, he will get that as well,
Because he's brought back into the family.
because he's brought him back into the family. So yeah, that's what that is.
It's,
But that giving him that
Interesting.
fattened calf is an insult. That was the animal on the ranch.
it's something that, when I was reading this,
Yeah.
I realized so much through it, and later on too. It's not by our works that we are saved. And all the stuff that this older brother is saying is his works and my works. And it applies to the Pharisees. I kept the law, I'm doing all this, without the understanding that the Father loves it.
Yeah, it's one thing to keep the law. We're not instructed to keep the Mosaic law, of course. But Jesus did say, if you love me, keep my commandments. Now, and we like to say, well, there's just two, but those two are spelled out in great detail in Matthew chapter 5, in Matthew chapter 6, in Matthew chapter 7, and in other places.
And it actually covers all the other Mosaic laws,
It does.
with making it simple.
And so the sermon, we call it Sermon on the Mount. There's a shortened version in Luke, Sermon on the Plain. But there is that. So there is, but we do that in response to, not to earn. And that's the big difference. Yeah.
This may be off track
No, go
because
ahead.
it comes from Paul.
Okay, go ahead.
Colossians 5:22, the gifts of the Spirit.
Galatians.
Galatians, that's
Yeah.
it. Okay. I'm elderly. See?
That's all right.
Okay. Anyways, my theory, thought, whatever, is that all the works that we produce come from the gifts of the Spirit.
Right.
And it's just an outcome of showing forth the Spirit that we have any works. That's right.
I like that. Yeah, that's true. So we have this conversation. Jesus is a great storyteller. We have this conversation between the father and the older son, and the father says, look, everything I have is yours. You're mine. I love you. But we have to celebrate. And then, of course, that famous line, your brother. Of course, the older brother says, this son of yours.
Yeah.
Reminds me of that thing with God and Moses in Exodus. These people, your people that you brought out of Egypt. Wait a minute. Moses says, no. These are your people. They're not mine, they're yours. But anyway, we got a little bit of that. But he still refers to the older son as his son, loves him, and he says, but we had to celebrate because this brother of yours is lost. But he's found. And then his audience and we, Jesus' audience and we, are waiting for what was called the denouement. We're going to get the ending of the story. And just like Jonah, shouldn't I care? Shouldn't I care about the 120,000, either babies or people who don't know their right from their left? Shouldn't I care about them? And all these animals? And then it just stops. Or the original ending of the Gospel of Mark, which I believe is verse 8. The ladies are given permission to go out and say something. Finally, Jesus has been going, shh, don't tell anybody. Now he's raised from the dead. The ladies have permission to go out. And the very last verse of Mark's Gospel says they were terrified and didn't say anything to anybody. And then it just ends. There's your invitation. Jesus gives an invitation right here. We had to celebrate. For this, my son, your brother was lost. And he's found it. And I think at that point he turned his head and looked right at the teachers of the law and said, how about it, fellas? But it just kind of ends right there. And that's not a good ending. I need more, don't y'all?
Actually, I think gives me much more appreciation for this parable and a lot of the others. When you read them, it shows how masterful Jesus did tell parables.
And the very last paragraph on the very last page of this chapter, 33. Because I don't want to give too much with it. In short, Jesus is redefining everything we thought we knew about connecting to God. He is redefining sin, what it means to be lost, and what it means to be saved. All right. Anything else anybody wants to add today?
That was a great book so far.
Yeah, it
Tim's
is.
a good writer.
Yes,
He's a great
very
communicator. He was. I keep forgetting he did.
And he died from what, pancreatic cancer? And that was a very painful death.
It was. But he died so gracefully, and he says there's nothing to be sad about. I'm going to be with Jesus. So anyway. All right, y'all. Chapter 3 for next week, and we'll pick it up there. Go and be well fed. Some of us are in a little bit more of a hurry than we normally are,
I
right?
know. I have to go too. I have an appointment.
I will go to Publix and meet you back here.